Is there a hidden code that can unlock Amazon and point authors in the direction of success? One man says yes, and he joins us today on Disruptor.
From the edges of publishing, it's Disruptor, celebrating the rebels, mavericks, and weirdos of the publishing industry and encouraging each of you to disrupt in your own way. Now here's your host, John Bard.
Greetings, one and all, and welcome to Disruptor. I'm John Bard. This is episode 7 with Alex Newton of k-lytics. I've been in the publishing world for close to 30 years, and I've seen a lot of things change, but maybe they haven't changed fast enough. And so I asked the question, are there disruptors out there? Are there people and companies that are really changing things in publishing, pushing us into the future, throwing out the old rule book and creating a new one all their own? I went in search of that, and I found them. And every week here on Disruptor, you'll meet them. Welcome to the journey. It's time to disrupt. Today's episode of Disruptor is brought to you by Writing Blueprints, the breakthrough step-by-step system for writers that creates truly great books. To learn more about the most disruptive way ever to become a successful author, visit writingblueprints.com and use the code DISRUPT to save 10% off everything on the site. The writing world has been shaken. Meet the earthquake. Go to writingblueprints.com and use the code DISRUPT to save 10%. Writing Blueprints. This is how you write a book. Like all writers, Alex Newton loves words. But he also loves numbers. Crunching data is one of his favorite pastimes. Frustrated by his lack of success selling on Amazon, he decided to crunch Amazon's publicly available numbers. What he found shocked him. Now he's sharing it with the world through his company k-lytics. His finds are helping authors sell more books on Amazon than they ever could have imagined. I spoke with Alex from his home in Germany. Our guest today is Alex Newton of k-lytics. Welcome to Disruptor, Alex.
Nice to be on the show.
One of the first things we always do here at Disruptor is ask a simple question. We are here to celebrate the rebels, the mavericks, and the weirdos of the publishing world. Which one of those words works best for you? Which one describes Alex Newton the best?
Well, I guess maverick is then probably the right term, not because I'm still in love with Top Gun when I was 16 years old, but it's probably what I did to myself, going against the advice, whatever mentor or other people were saying, and in the end, doing it my own way.
So talk about, in a nutshell, first, what k-lytics is before we get into how it's actually disrupting the publishing world.
Well, of course. Well, first of all, what does k-lytics stand for? It is K-lytics, and the K stands for Kindle. The lytics stands for analytics. Essentially, we started with, analyzing the Kindle market to draw conclusions and use the power of data, say for the indie publisher, for the agent, for the small publisher, to basically equip them with the, say, market intelligence, excuse my jargon, to take better and faster publishing decisions and ultimately sell more books.
So it's an analytical approach to selling books on Amazon. Tell me about how a really high-level student of yours might be using k-lytics to succeed right now. What kinds of information are they getting? How are they using that information in terms of the kind of things they're writing and marketing?
All right. Well, in a very, very nutshell, the essence of the data that we look at, we monitor many thousands of books. We look at book trends over time, very important. And in essence, we give the person, genres, subgenres, niches where the demand is high. So where you have avid readers who buy a lot of books, but these are at the same time markets where, say, the price levels is still healthy. And more importantly, even they're not overcrowded spaces. So in essence, it's high sales and low levels of competition if you were to completely simplify it. Now, this can help an author or publisher both in a very strategic way and when he or she decides what to write, but also in a very tactical way. Well, in what categories to put the book on Amazon, what should be the keywords, and, very tactical marketing decisions.
I imagine one of the reasons why you might run into some resistance is because from a writer's perspective, you're going against the grain of what they've been taught all these years, which is to write what you love, write what's in your heart, write the book of your soul. And in fact, what you're saying is there might be a room for that at some point, but right now, to get a foothold, write what people want to read. Is that a fair assessment of what k-lytics can provide?
You have a passion, right? And you should write to that passion, but how can you make that passion match with a potential target market? To get that sweet spot where passion and market, so the passion and the economics sort of coincide, and that is what we're after.
In a nutshell, and very briefly, because this is very technical, can you explain essentially how you get the data or what kind of data you're pulling?
Sure. I mean, it's no big secret. First of all, there's lots of manual efforts involved, but also we look at the data, monitoring essentially about 3,000, very soon about 5,000 bestsellers. Amazon has all these bestseller lists, starting from what they call the main category, so romance, sci-fi, mystery, thriller, suspense, you name it. And then it gets very granular, right, into science fiction and fantasy / epic / whatever it is. So it gets very, very granular. And Amazon tracks the top 100 titles every 2 hours in those bestseller lists. So when you start monitoring that over time, then you can start making a meaningful assessment of what the average performance of such a category is over time. So what distinguishes us a bit from, there's tools out there, or you can manually, at any time, you can go into a bestseller list and say, what is the number 1 title? What is the number 100? What is the sales rank of the number 1, number 20, number 100? It gives you a feel of how a category is performing. But first of all, that gets very tedious, especially when you should spend your time writing, because there's 5,000 of these categories by now. And the other thing, the big mistake people make is the market is dynamic. It's dynamic by the hour. Every sales rank that is being measured is relative to all those other 4.8 million English-speaking titles on Kindle, or 6 million if you take Amazon.com as a whole. So the whole point is, if you go onto the site like right now and you use any real-time tool that tells you whatever green smoothies is hot right now, that may have changed in 1 hour from now. So you have to, even if you do that manually on your own, you will have to monitor your genre, your category virtually every day to start drawing meaningful conclusion. And you may have to, eliminate books that are not really fitting into the category to really make an assessment. So in a nutshell, that is a bit what makes us different, monitoring trends over time and doing all the work that for an author, to my mind, would be a complete waste of time doing that work.
What are some categories that, if you're a writer looking to write to the market a little bit, or looking for a place where there's a lot of opportunity, where are some of the places you might be looking right now?
Well, first of all, you have to understand, and this is still a little generic, but what many people don't understand is that Kindle is dominated by 3 genres, right? So if you are on Kindle and you're in there for the money, you have to think about romance, or you have to think about mystery, thriller, suspense, or you have to think about sci-fi and fantasy. And then, by the way, a little bit of teen and young adult too, which is more a targeted age group than it is a genre, if you will. So that is what dominates the market. So if you talk about, what is trending within romance, there are a couple of very broad brackets that are extremely doing well, but also very competitive. Take contemporary romance, romantic comedy, romantic suspense, doing extremely well. But then within romance, you start getting into certain niches where, still a lot of money is earned by a couple of people. It could be military romance, it could be holiday romance, sports romance. Some people don't look at these type of niches where you have lots of money being on motorcycle romance, motorcycle club romance, or MC romance. That is what you're looking at when you start defining a niche in the romance market. In mystery, thriller, suspense, we recently did analyses on vigilante justice, very, sometimes that is on the back of also certain trends you have in the movie industry. You had Jack Reacher's and all, these type of books and movies. And then sometimes the book trend tends to be much more sustainable. I think the best example, by the way, would be about 10 years ago, we had Twilight and vampire romance, right? And you would say, then you had I think 3 of them in the movie theaters. And then you have authors like Bella Forrest, who then with 50 Shades of Vampire create like more, more than 60 books in a series over 3, 4, 5 years, writing and creating a wave that's long been over when it comes to the movie sides of things. And within sci-fi, to end up with sci-fi, you have currently, military sci-fi doing very well, space opera still doing very well after the Star Wars movies. So that's the type of niches you're looking at, and many more for that matter.
I had no idea there was such a thing as motorcycle romance. It's really amazing how the sub niches keep splintering.
Oh yes, and you have very loyal tribes within those. So just to give you an example, there is one author we work with. She's been on the forefront of what you call alpha male romance, which is actually a pretty broad definition, right? But that's where you see these bare-chested guys. But it's, there are some junk books in there, and then there are some authors who, like very seriously built their fan base in that genre. She has a mailing list of like 70,000 fans, focusing on that. Similar motorcycle romance or Navy SEAL romance, that's the type of niche you're looking at. And you find very, very avid readers that are very loyal to the authors they find in these niches.
So that's a great bit of advice right there for writers out there, especially those who want to disrupt a little bit, which is invent or create your own sub niche. Find something maybe based again on movies or on what's happening in the world. But if you can be the first in and introduce a sub niche into the world and own it, that seems to be a pretty exciting way of building a career. And using analytics, would there be a way to sort of point one in directions that might say, okay, here's an area where I might be able to kind of pioneer something?
Yes, absolutely. Some of the authors also use the data for almost creative purposes. So they look at what is like a super high trending niche, say in romance, what is one in sci-fi. Obviously, there is science fiction romance. It's a very big thing. But then within that, what is it? Is it the time travel? Is it the dragon, the shifter? There are a lot of nuances. And if you then start taking, the trending topics across genres, I suddenly get authors who say, well, I ask her, how do you use the data? Well, I also use it creatively, for, I wouldn't say genre blending, but for exactly that inventive process. Just one more example would be where you have urban fantasy, for example, right? So where you have the traditional definition of urban fantasy, or more recent one, whichever way you look at it, chicks, excuse my word, in leather jackets running around downtown with sharp-edged weapons slaying vampires, right? So that has become pretty mainstream. But then within those, there were a couple of folks who just looked at this huge trend of coming from Korea and Japan in manga, which is this thing called reverse harem. So where you have one female protagonist surrounded by a couple of handsome guys. It's not even like necessarily a romance plot, to start with. It's this, very interesting relationship between the female protagonist and all these handsome guys, which she likes. So that was taken, take some authors there in urban fantasy who then started putting reverse harem fantasy novels out there, and a couple of those have just been skyrocketing in the sales ranks.
So what's interesting there, and just talking now to our listeners, especially writers, what we're hearing is that if your initial reaction to today's topic was, well, I'm an author, I'm a writer, I don't want to hear about analytics, I don't want to hear about things broken down to numbers because I'm a creative person. What you're actually hearing is that by knowing these numbers, by knowing these trends, by knowing what's happening, you can be more creative because you could mix and match. You can go ahead and create that time-traveling motorcycle romance if that's what you want. But also knowing that you're disrupting and creating into an area where there are already readers. That's the beauty of this. You can create a new sub niche, but you already know where to find the readers because they exist in the niches that you're mixing together. So I wanted to just highlight that because this is a creative process as well as an analytic one. So
absolutely, and just to use the word, it also can help, with writer's block, right? Because what to write, you get a couple of data points of where the market is going, and say, well, that's easy, I could do that. So that helps a lot if you start out with a book project, or if you're stuck in one and say, well, okay, it is this whatever space opera, sci-fi novel or series I'm writing, but what's a bit the direction I shall be taking the project?
So let's talk about you now and how you've become a disruptor. So you were in a pretty corporate environment up till a few years ago. Talk about what happened and why you kind of made this rather drastic switch in your life.
Yeah, it started basically with disrupting my own life and really breaking the mold after 20 years. I've done what people might refer to as the run-of-the-mill, corporate career. I worked in top management consulting consulting to Fortune 500 corporate CEOs, across the world. I lived out of the suitcase. My whole passion, which I, by the way, still live now with k-lytics, is to bring facts to emotional discussions, which in corporate boardrooms, you can imagine there's a lot of heated debates and they're sometimes very emotional, but how to bring the fact-based, the rationality into those decision-making processes. So that was a great career, but my little daughter was born, she turned 4, and I still found myself traveling around the world and living out of the suitcase. So I really knew I had to disrupt, I had to change something and do it drastically. And that point in time that coincided with this, what you might call the Kindle gold rush. And I did a couple of these courses, how to get rich on Kindle and all these schemes, if you will. But I'm a very fact-based guy. I soon noticed, no, that's not how you disrupt the industry. You disrupt the industry not by whatever, uploading the 38,000 billionaire romance novel or thinking you can buy a Ferrari by uploading a breakfast recipe book that you got from your grandmother. That's not to disrupt, right? But looking at the data, I saw, wow, this could really help people. And that's how I disrupted my own life. And then it was a gradual process where some authors start looking at the data and say, wow, that's cool. Do you also have that for subcategories? And then later for subcategories. And now 4 years later, I'm doing it full time. And I noticed that, first of all, I disrupted my own life, thank God, to the better. And I spend a lot of time with my family, and I start getting lots of feedback from indie authors who say, hey, Alex, thank you what you're doing for the indie industry, because there's not many people out there helping us with the data.
So you really did, in many respects, what we're suggesting that authors and publishers do is you found a sweet spot that wasn't being filled. You brought your own skills and outlook to something, and then said, hey, there's all this data. Nobody's pulling this data together into a way that it makes sense to authors and publishers. I'm going to go ahead and do that. And that simple decision right there is where the disruption happens. That's usually where disruption happens, isn't it? Where people see a need that isn't being filled and step up and fill the need.
Yes. And I personally believe that disruption also happens on the back of something, and that something is sometimes a big experience base. It is a skill, it is a talent, right? So I think very seldomly you really find the disruptors who, just out of the blue, revolutionize the industry. Even if you take Mr. Bezos himself, if you look at his career or the people behind big inventions, they had many trials and errors, but in the end of the day, the disruption is almost like the cumulative result of some guts, but a certain skill, a talent, a craft skill, and that then meets a certain market. So in my case, it was really the talent for looking at data and in ways that, say, many geeks don't, right? There are many people who can deal with big data, but you have very few people who can translate it into a way so that an author And I jokingly say, if the data can be understood by children, grandmothers, and grandfathers for that matter, and corporate CEOs, then it is palatable, for people, for the artists, so it can be used. And that's what I happen to do.
Do you have a disruptor in history, or even possibly today, that you particularly hold up, that you say, okay, this person really changed the world, followed his or her own beat?
Oh, that's a very good question. My super spontaneous answer would probably be Leonardo da Vinci. And the reason why I say that is he was an artist, and he produced amazing works of arts, but he did two things, which I also, with k-lytics and working with authors, are two ingredients to what I believe success will take. Also, in his case, he was open to the idea of bringing science into the arts. So if you look at his sketches, right? So there's a lot of calculations, and there is science going into that, which obviously in medieval times, where everything scientific was almost was heretic, was totally maverick, if you will. But the other thing is, he did not just wait for the godly inspiration to produce and have a creative output. If you look at the biggest works of arts that help, God knows how many little sketches he made to then ultimately culminate into a big work of art. So my fundamental belief is you have to be open as an artist to also look in adjacent worlds. And one of these adjacent worlds is the science and the economic world. And the other thing, as an artist, I believe you have to produce quantity. You have to be prolific, because it is ultimately the quantity that helps you create the quality.
For people who want to disrupt in general, as somebody who disrupted his own life, as somebody who is now disrupting the publishing industry, what is your advice for someone who wants to disrupt?
Well, first of all, do two things. Look inward, and really finding out, what is your asset? What is your big quality? What is what you're really good at? And then try to take that inward look and bring it to the outside world and see, well, okay, where could that meet a certain demand, a need? And so my second piece of advice would be, go around the world, not looking on your iPhone all the time and looking down into this device, but walk around the world, and every day go into the shop and say, wow, my God, that's really bad customer service. What's missing here is blah. And how could you, or what you're good at, solve that problem? And once you take that frame of mind, what am I really good at? Or if you're more a team player, what is my team good at, or people I know good at? And what does the world need? If those two things come together, and then you even do a little bit of survey of what people need and want, that's when you start disrupting.
If people want to get in touch with you, if people want to learn more about k-lytics, whether they're authors or indie publishers or just people who are fascinated by Amazon, what's the best way for them to do that?
Well, there's two ways you can, first of all, have a look around the website. There is it's k-lytics.com. So k-lytics.com, spelled k-lytics as in analytics.com. You can have a look around there. You find also a button to the blog, klytics.com/blog, where there's lots of free information about the way we look at the industry.
Well, thank you very much. It's been fascinating. There's so much more to talk about. But we know that people have to go off and do their own thing now and go and create and disrupt. And now they have some inspiration to do that. Thank you, Alex Newton, for joining us. Thank you for disrupting.
Thank you very much for having me. Bye-bye for now.
Today's episode of Disruptor was brought to you by Writing Blueprints, the breakthrough step-by-step system for writers that creates truly great books. To learn more about the most disruptive way ever to become a successful author, visit writingblueprints.com and use the code DISRUPT to save 10% off everything on the site. The writing world has been shaken. Meet the earthquake. Go to writingblueprints.com and use the code DISRUPT to save 10%. Writing Blueprints. This is how you write a book.
For show notes and videos, go to disruptcast.online. And to start a disruption of your own, visit writingblueprints.com to discover the most innovative and coolest way ever to write a great book. We'll be back next week. Until then, go forth and disrupt.